Welcome to The Bold Blueprint, a podcast for modern educators who dare to think differently. Here we explore the intersection of education and leadership, diving into bold strategies, innovative teaching, and the mindset shifts that drive real impact. Whether you're in the classroom, leading a team, or shaping the future of education, this is your space to learn, grow, and lead with confidence. Another day, another episode. Hello, Barbie.
Hello, Jamie. Lovely to see you today.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I'm pretty excited about today's podcast with a very, very special guest, and it's we've got our very first international guest, Barbie.
Oh,
So that's pretty exciting. Today's guest is a person by the name of Kate Jordan-Downs, and hello to you, Kate.
hello. I'm very honored to be your first international guest. This is exciting.
This is exciting, and it is really, really exciting. And, today we're going to dive into the big discussion around this term called implicit bias, the fact that biases are really interesting. We all have them. You can't get away from it. We have biases even over the way we have breakfast in the morning, if you had that or not, right? But Barbie, I've personally known Kate for a very long time. Kate, I'd love you to share the story about how we know each other.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jamie and I actually met in the midst of an implicit bias discussion and training and moment. So it seems very apropos that this is the topic that we're discussing today. Both of us were working, I think it was 2015, Jamie, if I'm remembering correctly, for kinder care learning companies in the US. And I was leading the inclusion services team in our corporate office, and Jamie was one of our field leaders, and everyone was in town for what we were calling like a boot camp, which gave our field leaders an opportunity to kind of roll up their sleeves and learn about some of the operational things that they needed in their arsenal, some of the financial things, and then in my world, the education space. So it was a cool opportunity for me as an educator to be able to interact with all of the field facing leadership, because that kind of ahead of that point, I don't think we did it very much. So we had a conversation around curriculum, around professional development, all of the standard typical early childhood pieces. And then it was right around the time, or kind of on the heels of the release of the United States Department of Ed has a civil rights data collection division. And they had done their inaugural or first data collection of suspension and expulsion in preschool settings. And that had been released, and there was lots of reaction going on to it because the kind of like curtain got pulled back on what was happening in terms of discipline. And the disproportionate amount of discipline to certain groups for our youngest learners, right, our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And so I was kind of walking them through that data and what was going on. And, you can tell sometimes who has experience, either lived experience or professional experience in being othered or being disciplined or being marginalized. And there were a few people in that room that really I could feel their hearts beating a little faster as we were having the conversation. And so Jamie and I had a chance afterwards. I think you were one of the hearts beating a little faster. And that's where our relationship was really born and became a passion point for us, I think, through our entire professional and personal relationship.
Yeah, it was. I remember that so well. Sorry, Barbie, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say it's probably like how everyone describes meeting you, Jamie. Just like this, yeah, in a nice way. So Jamie, you'll probably notice if you give him a compliment, he'll be like, yeah. On that, he's too modest on that ego. So I'll try to be the ego on this for him. But no, it's very well said. I could relate very much to how Kate was talking about you, meeting you in a space.
Oh, thanks. It's really weird because being a Leo, I'm such an ego-driven person, but when it's the real stuff, I kind of backtrack from that. But I remember, Kate, we were both tasked with a pretty powerful I guess, project when we were
Mhm.
KinderCare. And for the Australian listeners, KinderCare have at that point around 2,500 centres nationwide for outside of school hours and long day care services. And I was appointed to work at Stanford University with which had 4 centres on campus. And Barbie, can you guess how small the smallest centre was a place per child? It was about 180 children per day per centre. So it was
Smallest.
right. So the centres in the States are very different to Australia. There was one centre that had 300 children per day. So really, really large, lots of complexity.
Wow.
And the client was Stanford University, which, I know we're on a podcast, but, they had their own agenda and their own stuff that they were working through. So
Yeah,
it was
standards, expectations, all of that. Their
all of that.
culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so Kate and me started, with that relationship, started working together on how to have this idea. And we coined the year to be the year of the teacher or the year of the educator. And across the year, we ended up having a lot of different aspects to reinvest back into the educator team. And that also included doing some workshops and professional training. And Kate, I don't know if you remember that day where we worked together around this concept of unpacking implicit bias.
Mhm. I
What was
absolutely do. Yeah, I remember it because I think what was interesting that was happening at that time is we were, organized, not just even in the organization, but kind of within the sector. Everybody was getting comfortable with talking about this phenomenon a little bit. Like the data had come out, and that gave some validation to people who maybe were a little hesitant to really accept that we had an issue like this taking place in our early childhood classrooms. um, and it was just the timing of it was interesting because people were trying to decide, so what do we do next? How do we tackle this? Like, we've now named this issue and this problem, so what, like, what happens? And there wasn't really, I think policy leaders were still working on trying to figure that out state by state. Individual organizations were working on it, and Jamie and I just happened to be like in one of those right place, right time moments where we had some flexibility and some interest and support from the organization and the client to explore this area a little more, which was exciting, but also really nerve wracking, to be honest, because we hadn't piloted a lot of this or tested it. We were just starting from this space of how do we start engaging in an authentic conversation about the reality of disciplinary practices within an early learning setting, which in and of itself are their own issue and problem, and then layering on all of the different disproportionate levels of exclusion and discipline that are happening to really specific groups of people, within the center. So I think I remember it as like excitement meets like terror. I don't know if that's the right word, but that was kind of the two heads bashing inside. But having the partnership with Jay, I mean, I think we were dressed up as superheroes that
we
day as
were?
well.
Yeah.
So I think that really helped kind of
Because
like
educators are the
empower me.
everyday superhero, right?
Yeah,
And so,
right,
yeah, yeah.
right. But I'd gone in with a few ideas, and I think we had 4 sessions mapped out throughout that day, and so each time kind of got to refine it a little more, read the reaction of the teachers, some of the activities with the questions, realizing like, oh, I really hit a nerve here, I might need to adjust that for certain groups or timing. But I think overall, the message, the feedback that we got about it was, I'm so glad someone said this out loud. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. And that was whether you were a teacher who was wildly aware already of this issue or one who was just being introduced to it. I think that's what's beautiful about early childhood educators. Like, they're social justice warriors at heart. So even if they're being told like, you're part of the problem, they're like, oh God, let me dig in and help and do some self-reflection. So that was my memory, Jamie, and reflection of that day. How about you?
It's interesting because I wasn't nervous. I was a little bit like a little coordinator going around
Mhm.
sure everything was cool. And I know we did a bunch of check-ins and all that stuff, but I do know, thinking back to that day, it was around educators really meeting other educators of roles of doing the same thing. So infant care educators or
Right.
preschool prep were able to meet others doing very similar roles. And in Australia, same thing. Like, it's very rare where people can physically be with each other during working hours, where that's where Facebook and anonymous posts kind of find their space, because people are wanting to connect in a way that can be authentic but also psychologically safe. But if I was just to take things back, just to strip it all back, Kate,
Yeah.
like, we've just talked about this word implicit bias and
Yes.
some examples, but like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that where you were going, Barbie?
Yeah. Like, how do you usually explain it?
I mean, implicit bias, it has a couple of different names too. People will say unconscious bias or subconscious bias. And essentially what it means, bias at its heart is an attitude or a stereotype that favors one group or another, one breakfast option or another. It can be benign, it can be extremely harmful. There's a spectrum of how bias exists. Um, Implicit bias or unconscious bias are those attitudes and stereotypes and beliefs that we have that we're not even aware are impacting our decision making and filtering the way that we see things, or respond to things and the expectations we have. So it's tricky because it's not something you're intentionally making a decision about. It's just part of your like software almost running in the back of your mind, and learning how to interrupt that and reprogram yourself is a big part of the journey. So yeah, does that feel like a solid definition, Jamie?
I think so. I mean, what does that look like in a classroom setting?
I mean, it manifests itself in a lot of, I would say, like, I probably limitless ways that I can't list, but I think the big ways are what we already touched on, which is disparities of discipline, right? Like how we view a child's actions and label them as curiosity or misbehavior, right? The ways that we can look at the exact same action or behavior and have a label or a reaction that we're not even aware we're putting on it. And then that leads to, over time, right, a disciplinary choice potentially. So there's discipline disparities that exist in our early childhood classrooms that are connected to implicit bias that we hold as educators, as leaders in the education field. Another way it shows up that we don't talk about a lot is access and opportunity. So if you think about in the classroom, if an implicit bias you might have is that boys are not ready for this next level of literacy that we're introducing, then I don't spend as much time with them. My expectations are lower with them. I don't expose them to as many options because I've already in my mind subconsciously said, oh, I'm going to put them in the block area a little more. I'm going to let them bang those things around and yell at each other a little more. And I'm going to focus this quiet, like, exposure time to this group of girls. Let's say that's an example. So it's opportunities and access to different exposure, even who you recommend, like as you get into your primary years or elementary years, who goes into a gifted, talented tract and who goes into an intervention tract, right? Like how those opportunities are filtered through. What
And
else?
could I
Yeah,
give a leadership
please.
example?
Yes. Yeah.
Or even something I do all the time just as a human being. I feel like it's I'm going to say it wrong, attribution bias.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so say if I'm tired, like right now,
Yeah.
Mr. 3 slept 5 hours, I might blame someone else, like Mr. 3 sleeping 5 hours. I won't blame the phone scrolling or anything like that. And I can explain away, like me before this podcast, everyone watching, I never drink Red Bull. I actually had a 10:30 swig of Red Bull today. But again, I will blame that on that. So I find like that might be a bias, whereas I might go judge husband next to me, blame, oh my gosh, you've got a Red Bull at 10:30. I find that can be, we don't even notice
Right.
when we're doing that or blame, and then even like a halo effect in the leadership space of we might think an educator's great at one thing, brilliant, like they can play with children till the cows come home. We just assume they can also then do everything else, like observations or everything, but it's not always true. So we might do that. I'm guilty of doing that as a leader, I know, in the past, and you don't always realize. I don't know if they're good examples, but just some things I was thinking of myself, especially with my present timing.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think that, because bias lives in all of us, like every single human that exists, it is going to take the shape of the experiences that we've had, of the socialization that we've had, of even, there's a bunch of studies actually, Barbie, about how you can reduce your bias or your proneness to bias in the workplace if you reduce workload or stress or exhaustion. Like, so you just hit on exhaustion, and those are actually, like, that's, scientifically shown to increase your bias thinking, right? To increase that subconscious knee-jerk reaction to something, because you don't have the cognitive energy at the time to pause yourself and really think about and reflect on why you're feeling the way you are. So it's just funny that you brought that up, because it's pretty prevalent in the current emerging research.
Yeah, especially in like neuroplasticity and all that side of neuroscience. And then I'm pretty open on having ADHD myself, and I know I was about to say we, but I struggle with executive functioning. Sounds very linked to that almost, like, because I know mine's very poor when I'm tired, and a lot of those choices I make it. You might, when you're well rested, think through things a lot more, especially in an unconscious way, on your biases of, you might know one of the children had a big day the day before, so you might plan ahead something that day, maybe a little slower morning activity. One of their favorite books just happens to be out at their iHat. Tired me may not even think of that, and that trajectory, I guess. And if I'm always tired and going into every day like that, I don't know, is that even a bias? Actually, am I describing that poorly as I've said it?
You're describing something that can contribute to your susceptibility to be biased in your decision making, right? Like, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're certainly not like consciously saying, I don't care that you haven't had a snack yet. I am just needing you to sit down and listen to me. That's not your conscious decision, right? But it's a software that's running in the background that we default to because we've been programmed that way. And there are certain, I think, contributing factors, exhaustion being one of them. Our neurodiversity across a spectrum, right, contributes to that. I think trauma contributes to our implicit bias, and because they don't necessarily come out of nowhere, right? We are socialized to believe certain things, or we have experiences that have led us to believe certain things. And sometimes those experiences or socializations have been broad stroked across a group that is not rational or reasonable to kind of put those attributes upon an entire group of people. But because it's hitting something either primal or ingrained in us, it tends to be our auto reaction or our subconscious bias and how we see things. So yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And it shows up, you really hit on like the teacher day-to-day interactions, just the implicit bias that any one of us holds will show up in how warmly we smile at a child when they come in, right? How much patience we offer them when we see them having a struggle. So I think those day-to-day interactions, how much praise versus reprimand we give. And the harmful impact, if we're unaware of those unconscious biases, is that a child who is told over and over again they're not on target or they're not enough, right? They're not doing what they need to do, eventually like becomes a self-prophecy, right? Like a self-fulfilled prophecy where they're like, well, okay, I'm bad. I can't do anything else but be bad. So guess what? Now I'm going to flip your table over. So there's a spectrum of time in which a child can adjust to some of our own adult issues, but they're also forming their own biases and awarenesses at this time. And so as early child educators, like we are tasked with confronting our own implicit biases while also trying to model how to have healthy perspectives on the really diverse world that we're living in. So,
Yeah.
as usual, no small task for a teacher. But yeah, I think those child teacher interactions that are those day-to-day ones can pile up and
Yeah.
impact.
I've got a story. Jamie Morrow's
Yeah.
story time.
We need to do snippets with
I
that.
know, I know, I know. But I won't identify who this is because it's going to be a bit controversial. And we talked about trauma-based bias, and over podcasts, myself and Barbie have spoken about our own
Okay.
with trauma and the fact that educators have really helped shape the people that we are. And I know that there is an affluent area across Australia, won't identify where, but an owner of those affluent centres said, our children at our centre, because of the affluent area, deserve to have nothing but the best.
Mm.
And what an interesting concept that was. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, actually, shouldn't all children have exposure to high quality education and care for the first 5 years? But actually, if we want to dig deeper, shouldn't the more disadvantaged services have space of providing high-end care? If we look at the demographics about the options of where people with more affluency, where that journey could go, or the not as many options for the lower demographical areas as well. And it's really interesting around this division, I think, not just in the US, because that's clear from my experience when I was there, but even in Australia, disadvantaged services can sometimes have stigmas around, behaviors and the quality of educators in that space, and the idea of what a family structure could look like. And as children enter the buildings, having those pre-stigma and those biases about
Yeah.
how families and children and even co-workers intermingle in this community space, and how we can kind of challenge that kind of concept and thinking as well. And I remember when I had that meeting with a potential owner of early childhood services, an individual owner, not a big corporate, being really, really challenged with that concept that if I'm in a high affluent area, well, they should deserve the best. I don't know
Right.
what our thoughts are around that story.
I mean, please, Barbie, go ahead.
I know. So Jamie and I are pretty open about our backgrounds, and I know for me, I grew up in an affluent suburb, but was in the opposite lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I've been at a school where they've got that kind of, for me, even though I was at that school, just a public school, but it was so different to my next public school I went to. It was like you're an outsider watching it and how they talk and interact and the expectations on everyone. It was quite different to watch, but there is that, I don't know, it's like a blend of bias and it's not even ego, like they're above others. But anyway, I don't know. I don't even know if I explained it well, but it was really different to watch it. Even in it, felt like an outsider. It never sat right with me. That feeling of like, why are we so good? like over others or anything like that. Because I felt like that was very much cemented in. Whereas I went to the next school, which was near one of our jails, had a very different family clientele
Yeah.
there. I actually felt way more included there. Maybe not as safe, but still way more included in your day to day and like could relate a bit more to how they spoke and how they went about it. That again could be my own bias because I couldn't relate. I just thought the first school was different, but could have been the norm. Whereas I felt more comfortable at the school near the jail, and even though that's not everyone's norm, I feel like I have not explained it there at all.
You
But
totally explained it fine.
I agree. I think, the phenomenon, I think, with bias and implicit bias is there are dominant cultures in all different like demographic slices. So if we, I'm speaking from a US lens, the dominant racial culture here is white. The dominant gender culture here is male. The dominant religious culture is Christianity. So like there are these dominant cultural norms that exist in every society. And if you are a part of those dominant cultural norms, the biases that you hold, you are definitely unaware of because it is your life. You're not questioning if something about you is different or othered. That doesn't come up to you. That doesn't come up for you naturally. You would need to be either having intentional conversations, or you would be in a more diverse, let's say, school or neighborhood where you could see different perspectives and different slices of life. So when I hear the example you gave, happens in socioeconomic class, right? Like, dominant socioeconomic class is wealthy. Like, that's the lens, that's the goal, that's the norm that people want to perpetuate. In family structures, it's a mom, a dad, 2 kids, a house, a fence, right? Like, there are these norms that exist, and our biases are socialized in that way, whether we are part of the norm or not. But when you made the comment that, you kind of watched from like an outside perspective in this particular, this more maybe like affluent area or resourced area, and then in your other school, although you may have been in a like physical environment that wasn't in proximity to the safest neighborhoods, it's the emotional and inclusion and safety stronger. And I think that's often true when you bring any group of people who have felt othered together. There is an ability to see, even if it's not your own perspective, whether it's not your race, not your religion, not whatever, fill in the blank. If you have stood outside of the dominant space, you know what it feels like to be there. And so you're more capable of making space for others. And I think that is kind of the heart of what breaks down implicit bias, is when you start perspective taking, because all of us have something that we're going to find ourselves outside of the circle in. It's just not called to our attention as much if we are in certain groups, right? And so it has to be a really intentional self-reflection that starts that journey. So then I think when you recognize something in you, you can see it in another, right? You can make space for it in the other. That's, to me, step one of like how we tackle this issue that's out there.
So I guess we've really unpacked a lot about what implicit bias is, and the fact that the thing is, guys who are listening or watching on YouTube, we all have biases. No
For
one's
sure.
not going to have a bias. Like, you have a bias how you even got to work today, how you went on a certain direction or whatever. Bias is also how we lead decisions and thinking and all that side. But I guess, thinking back to what you're doing now, Kate, and also what you did at KinderCare and over the years, and, getting to see, if I was an educator in a classroom setting, and I'm then listening to this podcast, and I'm like, oh, maybe I might have some biases, and I want to kind of shape the way I'm thinking, or maybe think differently, or kind of push myself a little bit outside of that. What kind of advice might you have for fledgling Jamie and Barbie?
It's funny. Like, there are, I don't know. I think that Jamie, you and I actually have done these before, talked about them in training before, but Harvard has a set of implicit bias, like, assessments. I'm not, the official name is escaping me, but I'll find it and send it to you all. But basically, as a part of their tackling implicit bias project, Harvard University built out kind of these screenings on a variety of different demographics. And the goal is for those who are wondering, hey, do I have implicit bias? And if so, where does it lie? You're kind of going through these different surveys or screenings that pretty objectively point it out to you as much as you can in a social human assessment that's online. So I would say, like, that's one place to start. Like, what are the tools that are out there that allow me to get a pulse on what it is that I might be running in the background of my software that I'm not aware about. I think that that's a pretty tactical, right, like, thing that you can do. also think that like what Australia I think does beautifully and is in your national curriculum is their focus on reflective practice,
Yeah.
because at the core of any change and improvement, no matter what we're talking about, is self-reflection and really asking yourself questions. So I have actually put together a little list of some reflective questions. I don't know if you want to hear them.
I would love to.
Okay, just
Yeah.
things that help educators examine biases. So, the first is ask yourself, who do I focus on or worry about the most in my classroom and why?
Oh, that's a good
So,
question.
kind of starting with like just thinking about where your attention goes, whether positive or negative. Where does that go and why? So you're considering things like, do you give extra attention to certain children for negative reasons? Do you find yourself watching certain children more closely because you expect something, them to do something? Or you're looking for that misbehavior. So just who am I focused on the most and why on both sides of the fence, right? Because bias doesn't always have to be a bias against something. It can be a bias for something, which by nature means somebody is being left out. Even if you're not intentionally saying, I don't want to work with these boys, you're like, I love working with these girls so much. They're bright, they're happy, they listen, they sit still. Like all of the things, that's a bias for something. But it is ultimately leads to an exclusion. So kind of paying attention to that.
Yeah.
Another second question I have is, how might I react differently to the same behavior depending on the child? So almost giving yourself a simulation, like we talk about this in challenging behavior trainings a lot. Like, what's your hot button? Like, what's the thing that if a kid does it, you're like, ugh, and you start to, you get like, feel unnerved a little bit. So kind of figure out what's your hot button behavior and then put that into child A and put that into child B and ask yourself if you would react the same or differently.
Mm.
Would you consider different things that could be causing that behavior? Like what does it look like? Like, how do I react to, the same behavior in different children? So, I would pause for a second. I'm just curious on reactions off the bat to those first two questions.
It's really interesting, right? Because I am thinking through. I mean, it's interesting because I'm not only just bringing it into a child space. I'm also a leader of people, so I'm also bringing it
Mhm.
into that space.
Yes.
If
Yes.
if X did something and then Y did exactly the same thing, would I respond equitably and fairly against the
Yeah.
two audiences? And I think in a classroom setting with educators, shout out to you, all you educators are doing all the important work. Sometimes there are some children who display continuously the same behaviors, but if another child did it just as every now and again, you might have an immediate. Let's talk about biting. Just let's take away the
Sure.
behavior. Let's go down biting. You have the chomper in the 2-year-old room, and the
Yeah.
2-year-old room is like chomping away, and it's like, everyone's on eggshells because we're worried about the parents' responses, and we're always there. But if one child did it one time, would I react in the same way? And maybe it's because I've got the muscle memory of even predicting that it could happen sometimes. And it's
Hmm.
like, then I'm starting to label the child. And I think the labeling of children is not good, but it's also, in my mind, I'm open to being discounted. But if we know children really well and predict predictable behaviors, is that also helping preventative measures?
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know.
it's
Go
like I
ahead.
said earlier, like the kid you might know had a rough day, and then the next morning, if you're all ready to go and had a good night and everything, and not using your own attribution bias, setting up something for them to succeed in that morning, that's where you actually know that child well. And maybe there's a case of, I was thinking this earlier when you were talking about implicit bias, but also explicit bias. I
Mhm.
find there's a lot of empathetic people, also the very opposite, but a lot of empathetic people in the profession, and we're probably all very vocal and aware of our explicit bias. We're more likely to say it out loud. Like you've heard me probably list off 1,000 already. More so than the explicit ones, like, oh, I wrote it for like, yeah, explicit's like what I will admit, and implicit's like what leaks out. But when I'm hearing this, and because I'm thinking of so many scenarios through my head and what like I've been through, is there ever a point too? I feel like Kate's got to go back to her question. So that's me thinking too much. That I'm talking too much. That's
I like
another.
you processing. It's all good.
That we do it also, like we need to do it, but some of us that are very explicit on it might be doing it too much. I've noticed this because there is that big. I love continuous improvement, especially in our curriculum and how it's like such a big thing in reflective practice. But sometimes there can be so much of that, especially in my lovely ADHD brain, that I don't always slow down enough. And sometimes those children, and I've learned this more being a mum, just need that slow down rather than the 100,000 strategies I've just prepared overnight because they had a bad day. That was me just thinking as we're talking on the explicit bias, like it's like, oh, can there be too much awareness of it?
Yeah.
So I want to react to your first thing, Jamie, and then to Barbie. So what I think is important to remember is that implicit bias, it's typically thought of as a bias or a judgment that's there without reason, without a lot of rationale. So when we're using our biting example, our friend has demonstrated several times that they're willing to take a chomp out of, arms and legs. And so that is a safety thing that as educators, we have to be proactive about and thinking. So it's less a bias in that standpoint, than an awareness of an issue that you're trying to like predictably and prevent. I think it becomes a bias if Jamie is doing it and Barbie is doing it, but we're only watching Jamie and Barbie is sliding underneath. Then there is a bias, right? Where it's the same behavior, and it's getting a different reaction. Or Jamie, you've maybe never done it, but you look like you might be a biter. So I'm just going to keep my eye on you just in case, right? Like we have to think so it's important to distinguish when we're being good practitioners and paying attention to things that are important in the classroom, and responding to it equitably and fairly. And I heard you say that earlier, Jamie, when you were talking about your staff, even, that we need to make sure that the definition of equitable is understood not to be equal, because it's very easy to say, well, would I treat everybody the same? Well, no, like, should everybody be treated the same? Not necessarily, because what you need and what I need might be different, but should everybody be treated fairly and equitably? Yes. So I think that just kind of side note,
I love that definition. Yeah, that's really helpful.
It's really important to know, like, that equal doesn't mean fair and equal doesn't mean equitable, right? Like
I just wrote down.
So, and this is complex. This is why it's not an overnight solvable, online course that we can all take. We're unwinding and unprogramming lots of things we didn't even know were there in the first place. And then we're doing that in the midst of real life, everyday challenges that exist in our classroom. And I think, Barbie, what I heard you saying is like, and then what if we swing too far the other way on this pendulum? And we're just like, I'm afraid to say anything at all because I am afraid that I am biased. Guess what? You are. Everybody is. So like, if we can just start adjusting and taking accountability and ownership that like we have them, and committing to like being more aware of them and working on them, that's what we're, I think that's the ask of educators. So I don't know, I was trying to like do a 2-for-1 there, and the response.
Sorry.
No, it's great. I think they were complementary to each
other. Great reflection. I think that was a really important narrative, especially for our listeners to really understand what we're talking about, because we don't want everyone to walk away and go, oh my God, I'm so biased. And oh my God, I'm working with this educator and she's so biased, or he, or
Right.
whatever. So I think that that was a good reflection. So we just had two. Do you have any other questions?
So yeah, I've got a couple of what are my expectations for each child's success, and might they be influenced by stereotypes? So just kind of doing an honest assessment. If you think of, like, let's say the 12 kids in your class, and it doesn't have to be super scientific and written out. These are the internal mental gymnastics that we do as people, right? And that we think about. So what am I expecting of you, of this child? And what is that influenced by? And then kind of doing that step deeper is, are there any stereotypes at play here? Because both of their parents are engineers, I expect that this little person is going to, far exceed the early learning standards in math, and I need to set up a whole STEAM situation. Like, there's all kinds of crazy things that happen in our brain when we're not paying attention, because it's just our auto programming. So asking questions like that. Do the materials and examples I use in the classroom reflect all children or only some?
Oh,
Again, that could be your own implicit bias, not intentional. And maybe you thought you put a really diverse set of things together. But if you step back and say, does it reflect the children in my classroom versus does it reflect what I think is diverse?
yeah.
That opens up maybe some blinders that you might have on, to certain groups. And I think I only have one more. No, two more. Sorry. Is this too long? I apologize.
No, yeah.
Okay. When I have a conflict or miscommunication with a child or a family member, could there be any cultural difference or bias at play? And that is one that I really had to confront with myself when I was, in my early journeys as a center director. I worked at Easter Seals Child Development Center in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah.
And
That was before your care days.
that was before KinderCare days. I was in my, oh yes, because we were in Columbia Heights together. I forgot. And that center was an inclusive learning center, by way of almost, I would say 85 to 90% of our children had some sort of special need, delay, service that they required. And then we also had about a 10 to 15% private pay population. It was in a really diverse neighborhood at the time, in Washington, D.C. We had all different types of families on the socioeconomic class, different languages being spoken, Salvadorians, Ethiopians, like a span of different cultures, perspectives, people who came from Southeast DC. And then, like, my 28-year-old white lady face popping around trying to figure out how to navigate this world that I was so open to and trying to learn from, but also like stepping in it every day, right? Like left and right, making some wrong turn. And I started, like, not intentionally, just unfortunately by error, right? Trial by error, being like, oh, I just hit a cultural line that I was unaware of because I didn't even consider it. I didn't even think about it. And that's where that whole like dominant lens space comes in. I don't have to think about certain things because I am a white woman navigating in the United States with certain privileges that I forget about. And so until you are confronted in spaces where that is not everybody's experience and you're getting challenged in that, you might not ever think to consider it unless, you've discovered in a podcast that there's this thing called implicit bias and you want to tackle it, right? Like so that cultural difference and understanding the different norms that exist, even in communication style, is a big one that I think would go a long way for educators. And then the last one is just probably the hardest one to ask yourself, which is, who are my biases affecting and why? So once you kind of peel back through some of these other
That's
questions.
confronting.
Yeah. Like, because now we're putting a face to something. And I think what keeps you in that is just knowing that like you're not alone in this. Like everybody is literally going through it, whether they acknowledge it or not, and whether they want to do any work on it or not. And for me, the empowering thing is, okay, well, I just learned another thing that I didn't know. I just learned another thing. I do that. I think I'm like, I got this figured out. And then something, even with my own children, right? Like things come up that are, you just get comfortable with discomfort. Like just buckle up. Like that is one of the things that you need to be prepared for, is being comfortable with being uncomfortable, or prepared to be uncomfortable. Yeah.
I reckon this conversation is so important because the fact is, if we were in an office setting, like a bookkeeper or a payroll person or an maybe not insurance is a bad example, but like it's quite a predictable experience, right? Where
Sure.
in our world, we're working with other educators who are going through their own journey in their own professional career based on wherever they're studying or returning back to the workforce. We're working with, every year there's typically different groupings of children that come into our classroom, which means that experience is going to change. So I think what educators across the world, what I have noticed is educators are quite, as you said before, Kate, they're quite malleable, I guess, or quite reflective and quite used to working in a complex, ever changing environment. Even the day can be quite different, right? And I think this question and this topic about implicit bias, I think the early childhood and outside of school hours sector are actually the most set up for this discussion, more so than others who are living their automatic life where every single day is the same, where our world in our sector, I don't think any 2 days are the same. The
Sure.
children might have predictabilities, as we spoke about before, and parents might come with predictable expectations and perspectives. But I think our educator workforce are really dynamic and exceptional compared to most sectors, I think. Like you think about a mechanic gets a car, every car has an engine and there might be different engines, but typically cars kind of do the same thing, right? But human beings and the human emotions are so complex, and what you're talking about, Kate, and I know Barbie, we've spoken about that inward reflection and that inner work that we all are continuously working on is that question of how can I make that child have a great day? I don't reckon any educator wakes up in the morning, unless they're a psychopath, that says, I want to damage the life of a child.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? And I think it is this important dialogue of thinking, what can I do inwardly to think about how I can present myself to get the best out of my coworkers, the
Yeah.
children in my setting or service, and also add as an extension of a community to a parent's life. And let's be honest, I mean, Barbie just spoke about it, 5 hours sleep. It's tough to be a parent. I've got 2 dogs. I don't know how you do it. I think it is a really, I think our educators are so equipped with this really deep discussion.
Yeah. I know that in the US, there have been, a lot more studies done between 2018 and present day, kind of when the dawn of this first started rolling out in the mid 2015 time. And that while the information and what we're learning is still really concerning, what we're also starting to research alongside of the data collection, like interventions or strategies that might be helpful, and seeing some promising outcomes in different spaces. I mean, everybody wants to throw training and development at a problem, and that's a really good place to start. But specifically in the space of implicit bias, and for our educators who are really looking to understand and do the work, it cannot be a one and done. It will not be effective. It has to be ongoing, because you need time to grapple with it. I think that we're all we all have the potential to be defensive to hearing, even from ourselves, right? Even when we're telling ourselves like, hey, you might have this thing. It's like, no, I don't know. And you find ways to explain it away and get rid of the discomfort.
This is going into a blame topic now. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Into
Like me being tired, I blame.
Yes.
It's not my
Right.
fault. It's their
Yeah,
fault for getting me cornflakes. I eat Wheat-Bix.
or I did this because this other thing happened.
Yeah.
You made me be this way, right? Like there's it's just, I think it's human nature to not want to feel bad, right? Like to not want to feel like something about you is wrong. And I think if you can change your mindset to be like a little more forgiving with your shortcomings, but not take your foot off the pedal, still be relentless, but be forgiving along the way, you can stay in it a little more. And I have seen exercises that kind of help people get over the hurdle of really digging into this, where you identify participants or whomever, educators in conversations, when they find the thing, when they find the moment that they felt the impact of bias against themselves, it then opens up a possibility that they not only could receive that from somebody, but they could be giving it to somebody as well, right? Like they could be the person who causes the othering, the exclusion, the judgment. And once you kind of get to that tipping point of being able to, it's not just about saying like, oh, I do all these bad things. It's about like, I'm also implicit bias is infecting me in a really poor way. Like there are all kinds of things that are happening to me as well, potentially. And allowing yourself to feel bad about that too, it makes you want to find the solution, right? Like in a different way with a different lens. So yeah, that's, I guess, kind of like my teacher care and heart perspective is like, they're all feeling and have the potential to be experiencing implicit bias in their workspace. So how do you help people who are, I mean, let's think about our workforce, right? Like our workforce is predominantly women. I can't speak to Australia, right? But
98% women.
I would imagine, right? Yeah. Predominantly women. The pay that we provide is putting them in socioeconomic classes, right, that are lower. And are we insane to think that they're not up against 100 biased hurdles in their day-to-day lives? They are. And so now we're also asking them to deal with that and get rid of the biases they might have or address the biases they might have. And it's hard to do that when you don't make space to acknowledge that like you are also impacted negatively by implicit bias. We're not all just doing this bad thing out here together. It's negatively impacting all of us. So we should all kind of be on board to at least explore it and have a conversation.
I was just, again, you can tell I have these random thoughts as you're talking. It's almost like your bias is like this emotional reflex, but then you can then switch, like that comes first before it's kind of a conscious one.
Mm-hmm.
And say examples before blaming everyone. I like to think I'm very aware of my biases, as already seen, except for driving. As soon as I'm in the car, it's everyone else's fault. And that's
your
what I was thinking.
Reptile brain kicks in. Yeah.
Like my emotional reflex is there on like, gosh, how dare you do this? And it's like swearing. I swear it's the only place I swear is driving.
Oh, really?
The car. Yeah, yeah, it all comes out. And it's not even a conscious choice. So like I was just thinking of bias can be more that emotional reflex, but then we can have our own conscious choice of then what we do about it. It doesn't mean I have no idea actually why I react like that with driving. I've never had any issues. Right. It's just where it all comes out. Maybe that's my vent space. But then what we do with it consciously can then be our growth and then moving forward. Again, that's what I was just thinking as you're talking on it.
I think, Barbie, it's so true though. And I think, Kate, you just spoke about the reptilian brain, which is interesting because for the listeners, educators, when we're talking about bias, that is maybe ingrained, that it's non-conscious. It's actually deep within our brains, and that is where non-conscious thought lives, and it's got to go through the emotional response
Yes.
rate, which is the fight and flight. If you think about when we were cavemen
Oh,
and the woolly mammoth, I don't know if humans, woolly mammoths were around at the same time, but just bear with me, and you're being chased, you would have an emotional response to get away or call your mates with the bow and arrows to get that woolly mammoth, right? With a fight or flight.
Mhm.
And also there's the freeze mode, which is the other aspect that can sometimes happen. But it is, if we're going to really look inwardly and identify the bias by asking these reflective questions, be kind to yourself, because you might actually be working through, one, identifying it, bringing it into the conscious mindset, going through the emotional thing, which
Yeah.
is looking inwardly. But I would also like to share with everybody is that human beings are so beautiful that we have the power to change. And
Mhm.
it takes time to work through conscious thought back into that unconscious behaviors, which is called habit forming. And so, what my advice to people would be, once you identify that, it doesn't mean that you need to change anything about yourself right now, but it's just about being mindful and having that conscious thought. It's a little bit like myself. I started wanting to watch, now this is not about bias, but just going into an unconscious thought to a, I now set my alarm 30 minutes before the sunrise. So in the morning, I now wake up before my alarm clock, which, because I've been doing it for a while, to go watch the sunrise. So I can walk on the beach, start my day fresh, get into a bit of nature before I deal with the complexity. But it actually took about 6 months before I then started waking up before the alarm clock. It didn't
Mhm.
just happen just because I decided
Yes.
to want to do that. And so what you're talking about, Barbie, is you've identified that, but you have an emotional response. And I think leaning into that discomfort, Kate, that you're talking about is, I think that's a pretty healthy journey.
For
I don't know.
sure.
I realized I was describing the amygdala as well. Like when you said the reptile brain, as I said it, I'm like, oh yeah, it sounds like a bit of that. I had to Google it because I forgot. I forget every word out there. And it's like, it says it's wired for survival, as you're saying, Jamie, not fairness. Oh, I don't mind that explanation of it. Um, and then just working with it, knowing it and being aware of it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
It's
sorry, but Kate, what were we going to say?
no, I just all I was saying is it's complex. This is very it's complex. All of this is very complex, and I actually love the alarm clock example
Mhm.
because like you know that what the outcome of that intentional choice of getting up 30 minutes earlier to see the sunrise will be. You've either experienced it or you've heard about it. You read a book about how great it'll be if you get up and you walk on the beach, right? Like there's something like out there that's telling you the outcome will be great. The reality is you now have to get up 30 minutes earlier than you're used to, and your brain is not into that right away, right? And like maybe when the alarm goes off the first week, you're like, never mind, this is dumb. I don't want to do this anymore. Or you snooze it and you miss it, and you're imperfect in that journey until you eventually hit, like whether it's 6 month mark, whatever it happens to be, where a routine or a ritual has become very natural part and ingrained part of who you are. And I think that's a really perfect non-biased related example to what this work is like and the process of it all.
So as we start wrapping up, Kate, I've just got a couple of things here that I've got in my
Yeah.
notes as well. That, as the audience and the listeners, this is all about you, educators and centre leaders across the nation, across our beautiful sector. As you take away, I would love to promote, self awareness. So really looking inward, and I like this word called disruption, which sometimes in
Mm,
our space. Disruption can also be causing chaos, but think about this world of disruption of your autopilot. What are you just getting through the day without thinking about it? So disrupt that autopilot thinking and, focus on your individual complexities and, be receptive to feedback. Part of my career, and I'm sure Barbie, you would agree, we've all had great mentors, and mentors is someone who can be honest to you, say it like it is, but also
Mhm.
having a trusted environment that you're not going, oh, that jerk said this, and turn it into a negative space. But also encourage open questions to people that you trust, and challenge the idea of, do you see that perception in me? Could I do something a little bit different, and not just go through the rhythm of the day as per normal? Because as educators, we do want to think about those little young people coming into our classroom settings in an inclusive environment, no matter what their background. We've got a duty of care and obligation to those formative years to be able to be in our space, in our education and care, because you don't know what life is like outside of those doors, but you do have control, so much autonomy, more than you realize, of what you can actually do in that environment. So it isn't always just about going through the checklists and going through all the procedural
Right.
things that we have to do, but what is life like for that child? What is life like for that co-worker that you work with? And what is absolutely within your control and power to make a difference, really? It's quite a powerful moment.
Absolutely.
So gosh, we could talk for hours. I mean, Kate, this
That's
is
what I said. I was like, well, there's all these little spirals that we'll end up being in because it's just so human. Like we are talking about like the heart of human nature and humanity and like evolving as people.
yeah.
And that can look a lot of different ways in a lot of different circumstances. But I'm grateful that you all have a platform that allows for this type of non-linear dialogue, because oftentimes I think the linear makes it feel too simple, simpler than it should. And I think the messiness and the discomfort, like nobody grows when they're comfortable. Nobody says, you know what, everything is perfect, I think I'm going to change it all up, right? Like you grow when you're uncomfortable, you grow in discomfort. And I guess like feel like lean into that when you feel it. Don't run away from it. Like accept that it feels crappy for a minute, but then ask yourself, like, why does this feel bad? Well, I don't want to be this way, or I wish this didn't happen, or it makes me like, those are all these really human emotions and reactions that we've got so trained in just pushing down and ignoring and moving on and doing the next thing. And that's why I call it like this unlearning and reprogramming process. Like chaos is absolutely what's happening in your brain when you're telling it not to think the thing it automatically thinks anymore. Like that's like makes no sense, right? You've pulled the disk out. It doesn't, how do we make sense of this new, motherboard? And we're between the plasticity of our brains and the beauty of humans, we do change if we put the work in.
So Barbie, should we do it?
Oh, my final question.
Hey,
That I
final question.
It's like an essay now because I keep elaborating on it. No, it has nothing to do with our topic, because sometimes like I love these type of topics, but then it's always good to end it with something that gets people thinking.
We had our own biases bringing it in when we
Yeah.
started the question from episode 1 all the way through to whatever episode we're on now, and it has literally evolved over time.
Awesome.
But
I can't wait to hear.
Yeah, but that's us working with our bias and being aware on that.
Yeah.
On that, so we've been asking guests we get on, what was your first live performance you remember attending? Now, this for a lot of people, when Jamie and I started with our bias, we're both into music, we thought live gig. A lot of people have never even been to a live gig, so that's now where my essay comes in, live performance, whether it's music, theatre, movie, all that type of jazz.
Live anything you remember going to?
Yeah. So when I was young in the elementary years, there was a like local playhouse that my parents somehow became season ticket holders to. And I don't really remember how that all went down because that wasn't really a part of how we flowed. But all of a sudden we had, I think they wanted to try something new and introduce their kids to something different. So it was called the Weather Vane Playhouse. It's still there to this day. And it was just a little local playhouse that put theater productions on. And I remember really looking forward to, you always had the same seat watching whatever was going to happen, even if it wasn't like my favorite thing ever. It was still kind of cool to be there. I knew I was at something. So that's probably my first
So it's like a community theatre.
real memory. Yes, it was a community theater.
Oh, wow. We haven't had that before, Barbie, I don't think.
No, and that's what we like. And then
Yeah.
Jamie, actually, you're really good. I don't know if you're even aware. Sorry, I haven't even let you ask this yet. He tends to always ask, "Were you with adults?" Or like, and it gets people thinking like, "Oh, if they went with adults, or was it their first live thing alone?" And I've noticed, Jamie, people start thinking about like, "Oh yeah, who was I there with?" Like it's a whole different depth of where it takes people as well. And these,
yeah, I was definitely with grown-ups. But I will say that I had the chance to do like a summer workshop they had for kids there one year. And I don't know if you guys remember the music group CNC Music Factory.
No.
Okay. So big early 90s, like 3-hit wonder in in the United States. And they had a song called Strike It Up at the time. And there is a picture of me like standing on top of like some set design thing in this weather vane Playhouse t-shirt and like my Umbro shorts that were super cool at the time. And I am lip syncing this song like in full performance mode. And I used to hate, my parents loved that picture. They used to show people, I hated it. But then as I got older, I was like, oh my gosh, I know why they love this. Because their kid is just being like unabashedly like
100%. I love that.
Right? Like in this moment. And, it was, I will find it and I'll text it to you. I have it somewhere still to show you.
That would be the best. Oh my God. Well, thank you so much, Kate. And thanks for the discussion and really appreciate it. And Barbie, as always, how great is it going on this journey together?
I love these. I feel like I'm on my own professional learning journey. You might notice with my pen and paper, it's not for the listeners, it's for me. So thank you so much, Kate.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I was honored to be a part of it. It's always good to see your face and hear your voice again, Jamie. It's lovely to meet you. And hey, I can be a repeat guest if you like. Be happy to.
We'll be down. We'll be down. Okay. All right, guys. See you next time.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Bold Blueprint.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out to us on
elm.net.au or
fireflyhr.com.au.
Bye.
Bye.